Hello, and thank you very much for joining us at Hexcon23 and for joining me, Jerry Gadori, founder of Redbeard Solutions, for a discussion on how we can help you to become a destination employer in this ultra-competitive marketplace. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and get into this. As I mentioned, my name is Jerry Gadori. I'm the founder of Redbeard Solutions, and we're a cybersecurity and technology professional services firm whose mission is to help firms like yours to draw the best talent in the marketplace effectively, efficiently, and in a cost-effective way. To that end, we created the industry's first cybersecurity and technology recruitment as a service platform. And as mentioned, its entire mission is to make you more effective at building the teams that you need in order to succeed in this space. Now, the way that we do it, the strategy that we employ for all of our member and partner companies is what we call the two pillars approach. Now, the two pillars approach, let me go ahead and switch slides here. The two pillars approach looks at retention and recruitment as separate but connected efforts. Now, we're going to go through the retention pillar a little bit today, but only the aspects of it that really are related and inform recruiting. And we're really only going to talk, other than a brief overview, about how they inform recruiting and how they impact recruiting. So, in brief, the three aspects of retention we cover today are your company's culture, your compensation packages, and your career growth. Recruiting, in an effort to expand my alliteration, we're going to look at planning, the often forgotten step, being proactive, and your presence in the space. So first things, looking at retention is culture, okay? So what do I mean when I'm talking about culture? Go ahead and move this down. So when I'm talking about culture as it relates again to recruiting, I'm talking about it in two ways. The first is from a leadership perspective. When you're not there, what does your team do? The answer to that question is what the real culture of your company is. Said differently, if you were running a physical location and you had 50 folks on site, if you were to leave that office for an off-site meeting, would they do the things that you would want them to do? Would they do the things that they would do if you were there? When you're gone, that's your company's culture. That's important to understand as a leader. But the part of it that I really want to be focused on today is the second part. If you, in that hypothetical example, were to go up to somebody on your team and say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Person, how do you describe our company to your friends? How would you describe our company and what it's like working here to a mentor? If a colleague or friend of yours was a match for a role that you knew was open, would you ask them to join? If so, how would you describe working here? That culture needs to be first and foremost up front in your recruiting efforts, in any of your recruiting advertisement. And this is something that's often overlooked. There are many different cultures out there in the marketplace. There's the stereotypical old bank that's very rule-bound and very orderly and very staid and slow-moving. There's that hair-on-fire startup that operates at a manic pace, and everything in between. The key thing to remember here is that you truthfully and honestly represent that culture. Now, quick related side note here. If you're not happy with the culture, by all means, take the effort that it takes to change that and improve it. It's worth its weight in gold. There are countless books in the marketplace, and I'm happy to recommend some if you reach out to me after. But it's important that whatever that culture is, that you share that with the marketplace. Why? Great question. The answer is this. Your culture does two very, very important things as it relates to recruiting. It attracts and it repels. Why is that important? Well, the attraction part is obvious. We want the largest amount of talent to come. But we want the largest amount of talent that resonates with our culture. So, for example, if I'm hiring somebody for that stereotypical bank that I used in my example earlier, I need somebody that's going to thrive in a rule-bound, slow-paced, staid, and steadfast organization. If I'm hiring for that hair-on-fire startup, again, I need somebody that's going to thrive in that chaos, that's going to thrive in that there is no order and we do the things that need to be done today environment. And the person that will thrive in one will likely not thrive in the other. So if all of my advertising materials, if my dialogue, if my presence in the recruiting marketplace represents that bank example, the talent that I need that resonates with that will see that and hear that, and they're more likely to apply. But that person who would thrive in that startup environment is likely to be pushed away when they see all of the examples of, again, and I'm exaggerating for effect, people in three-piece suits, people gathered around large conference tables over spreadsheets. These are things that will likely repulse a person who wouldn't match that culture. Now, I'm not talking about diversity here, of course. I'm talking about the makeup and characteristics of what a candidate is looking for in the place that they work. So again, culture, this is how culture impacts our recruiting efforts. Okay? So the second thing that I want to talk about here is compensation. Now, quite obviously, that's how you pay people, not news. Now, when it comes to retention, this is obvious. If you're not paying people competitive wages, they don't stay. No brainer. How does this inform your recruiting? Quite simply, as somebody who spent more than 2 decades hiring internally as an executive for my own companies and externally for other companies, I can say this with the authority of having been in every seat at the table. If you're not paying market rates, you're going to struggle to consistently fill roles. That's just table stakes. Now, before you get too upset, I understand that some organizations, some companies, some types of businesses simply have more money to spend, and that is what it is. But know that the farther below the median that you fall, the more difficult time you'll have to fill these roles. And in a world that's increasingly remote, your market has expanded, both in your ability to draw talent, but also in the companies that are competing with you for that talent. So understand that competitive compensation is critical for long-term success. Now, here's another piece of this, though, that's often overlooked. Compensation isn't just salary. So ensure that whoever it is in your team that's handling recruiting, that probably bears some mentioning here. Do you have an internal recruitment team? If you do, they should be a part of a lot of the things that we're going to talk about. Do you work with outside partners, external firms? You want them as dialed into the things we're talking about as possible. And if they're not, I would question working with them because they're representing your brand in the marketplace. And ultimately, it's your organization that has the gold star or the red check mark. So keep that in mind. If you're the type of an organization that leaders in different groups share out this responsibility, again, make sure that they're consistently relaying the information the way you want it done. Because once again, your brand in the marketplace, like your brand everywhere else, is hugely important. So, tangent averted, back to the main plot line. When we're looking at compensation, make sure we're looking at the whole picture. So your salary might be slightly below median, but maybe you offer individual bonuses. Maybe you offer team bonuses. Maybe there is an opportunity to earn commission. Maybe you have other ways that folks can earn. Are you calculating in the value of your benefit package? Is your 401k special? Is there some aspect, something, some benefit that you offer that's not common in your space that you can share here? Now, I can't say this enough, and it's been lampooned all over LinkedIn for years now. A foosball table doesn't make up for being 20% below market in compensation. I don't mean that. But there are real benefits that have tangible value, and that might be something that throws somebody over the edge. So make sure that when you're talking about compensation in the marketplace, when you're recruiting, that you're bringing all of these factors in, okay? This is a huge piece. Next up after compensation is career growth. Now, I put this after compensation for two reasons. Number one, frankly, from a recruiting perspective, this is the more important thing. From a retention perspective, not necessarily the truth, but from a recruiting perspective, it most certainly is. But career growth is one of the unsung heroes in your retention efforts. The more clearly that you can map a person's career when they join your organization and talk to them about their career growth, the more taken care of that they feel, and the more likely they are to stay. Now, as this relates to your recruiting efforts, there's a little bit more to this, because this can represent the type of success stories that can really turn a candidate on during the recruiting process. If you can tell a story about how one of your cybersecurity architects started their career in your organization on the IT help desk, was promoted to a shift supervisor, moved over to technical support, where they started to cross-train with the SOC team and utilize that to move over to cybersecurity, that can be a very powerful story to tell. That shows people on the outside that there's opportunity inside here. And those type of stories can be well worth their weight in gold. The other part of this that's critical is it gives your recruiters things to talk about with in-demand candidates, not just on the junior side, but on the mid and the senior side as well. Now, quite obviously, somebody junior in their career is looking very, very closely at career growth because they've got a long ladder to climb. But it's still very true of mid to senior level folk as well. So if you're talking to a mid-level cybersecurity person and you can help them map out what their career growth could look like inside the organization, you're doing both you and them a service. And your recruiter, if they're sharp, can utilize it in their questions. So Mr. or Mrs. Cybersecurity person, you're 5 years into career and you're considering cybersecurity engineering role here. What would you like to do next after that? Where do you see that taking you? 5 years from now, what would you like to be doing? Are you going to be in this space? And as they're talking, if the person talking with them from your team, again, whether internal or external, can speak to how that candidate can accomplish that in your company, they're far more likely to continue. Now, for a more advanced technique, if that recruiter shares those notes with the hiring manager can map out how that would work. And the more tangible information they can share with that candidate, the more real this opportunity becomes to that candidate, the more likely they are to continue the process. Career growth, cross-training, upskilling, skill set training, certification support, advanced college course and degree reimbursement, all of these things can be very powerful in your recruitment quiver if used appropriately. But the number one thing in this is customizing it to the wants and the needs of the person that you're talking to. Again, the more real you make it to them, the more likely they are to continue, the more likely they are to come aboard. Now, taking one step even further, when that person orients and joins the organization, when they matriculate in, lay out that career path again and say, so, Mr. or Mrs. Cybersecurity Engineer, you at present have experience in the AWS cloud. Once we've got you fully up to speed, we want to start teaching you Azure and Google Cloud as well, so you can become become multi-cloud. Now, looking at what you'd said from my notes during your interview, that was important to you. Is that still the case? Okay, great. Well, these are the steps that we take to get there. I tell you that is worth its weight in gold with that person. They're going to work that much harder because you've mapped out a path for them. Now, this isn't a set it and forget it type of a thing. As part of your overall coaching and mentoring of that person, it's critical that you keep that conversation going because, of course, goals change. And as a person joins your organization and has spent some time with it, they might decide the path they described isn't what they wanted after all. So again, don't set this and forget it. But man, what a powerful tool to get started with. So we've looked at the three pieces of the retention pillar. let's move over to the recruiting part. Now, as mentioned on the retention pillar, I really focused on how it relates to recruiting. Surprising nobody at this point, we're going to focus on how these things impact recruiting as well, since it's the recruiting pillar. Now, recruiting plan, what do I mean here? The recruiting plan is what you're anticipating for the upcoming period. A year, whether it's fiscal or calendar, isn't super relevant. But you need as much as is possible to plan out your hiring. Now, I realize business happens. I realize in different types of organizations like consulting companies, for example, the types of folks that they need depends on the business that they win. I understand that. But wherever it is possible, we want to plan our hiring. And the reason for that, we're going to talk about in detail next, and that's proactive versus reactive recruiting. But the more lead time that we can give our recruiters on when a person needs to start, the more opportunity we give them to be effective and proactive in the attraction phase of those candidates. Said differently, if I know 9 months in advance that I need to hire for a certain type of person, I will use the first 3 months of that researching where those candidates live, where they congregate. I'll spend the next 3 months getting deeply involved in those places, seeding the ground with news about our organization, the things we're accomplishing. I'll spend the next 3 months actively recruiting for that role. What that's going to do for us is it's going to give us access to a dramatically wider group of candidates. It's going to increase the likelihood that those candidates, because they know about us, they've seen us out in the places where they are going to respond to the outreach of our recruiters. And most importantly, if our recruiters do their job right, it's going to mean that they're likely to engage with them. Okay, so the planning phase is by a lot the most overlooked. I've just given you the reason why. Now, again, this next part will vary based on your organization. But once the plans are done, we want to make sure that they're disseminated with the relevant parties. So if you're, again, an organization that has a separate recruitment team, or if this is something you outsource, or if it's something that you share, whoever's going to market for whichever roles that we're able to plan out, we want them to know as soon as possible. And we want them to be able to utilize that time effectively. So just for the sake of illustration, I'll go back to my cybersecurity engineering role. So that person, again, in our hypothetical organization, they report to the director of cloud security, or maybe the director of cloud operations, whatever. That person is going to be the one tasked with writing the job description for this role. If that person is not the one doing the actual recruiting, you've got an internal recruitment team where it's outsourced, they need to get that job description to that person doing the recruiting as soon as possible. And that person needs to have the internal ability to push back on that description. And the earlier they can do that, the better, because it gives that manager time in the millions of things I'm sure they're responsible for to help craft the most effective presentation. Now, what does that mean? I have seen countless times where a hiring manager dusts off a year-old job description from a very similar role and gives that to the internal recruitment team to go fill that role. Now, in an effective recruitment organization, that person will have the ability to push back to that manager and say, hey, this is the same job description you gave me a year ago. I know that our tech stack has changed, or I know that we've hired 3 people. Is the dynamic the same? Is this the order of importance for these particular skills, or are they different now? If that manager gets that feedback and can change it, now we have a more effective job description that recruiter can tailor to the marketplace. So that's just an example, but that's the importance of planning. In addition, it could very well be the case that manager is looking for something that doesn't exist in the marketplace in a meaningful enough amount to matter. And that recruiter can share that information now and changes can be made. So I'm going to say it one more time. Planning is the unsung hero of effective recruitment as it relates to the hyper-competitive cybersecurity space. In addition to this, in the inevitable times when we do have to practice reactive recruiting, which we're going to talk about here now, it makes us more effective. So before we get into that piece, what is proactive recruitment and why is it so important? So given that it just followed planning, I'm sure you can effectively guess what at least part of this is. Proactive recruiting is the act of beginning to work on a role long before it actually needs to start. Reactive recruiting, also known as the nemesis of effective recruiting, is getting a role that needs to be filled immediately or within a month. That's reactive recruiting. Now, again, I understand business happens, things change. Reactive recruiting will never go away entirely. That is a reality that I'm very, very aware of. But if the majority of your recruitment efforts are reactive, you're not spending enough time on the planning phase. And that is hurting your overall employment brand. Proactive recruiting, as I just defined it, it's going to the market well in advance of the need, allows your team to do some things that they can't otherwise do. Number one, they can find out where those candidates are. They can do their research to find out where they congregate. They can effectively seed that ground. We're going to talk about all these things in presence. But most importantly, in a marketplace that has been statistically fully employed for more than 20 years, at no point in the United States has cybersecurity or technology employment been above 3%, which is statistically fully employed, in the 20 plus years that I've been doing this. At no point in that time, ironically, has it been easier to get the contact information of candidates, and yet harder to get them to actually engage with you. And the reason for that, again, is because of reactive recruitment. That recruiter gets a role from their manager. They've got to get it filled right away because it's costing the company money that role is open. They go to the marketplace and they do a quick word search on the relevant key terms that they're looking for. And they blast out a bunch of, frankly, untargeted, unsophisticated outreaches, hoping that one of the hundreds of people they sent to will reply, be interested, and be the right person. Because of this scattershot approach, candidates are very rarely willing to engage in a meaningful way with recruiters, frankly, rightfully so. When you're an advanced IT person or cybersecurity person and you're getting outreach for jobs that represent things that would have been interesting to you 15 years ago, you rapidly lose interest in responding. If you're a cybersecurity person, on top of that, you're probably professionally paranoid and think this is some type of a phishing attack as well. So the way that we avoid that trap is we get involved in the places where our folks are. And we can only do that if we're taking the time and putting the energy into proactive recruitment. So the obvious place, LinkedIn. Are your recruiters and your executives active on LinkedIn? Are your recruiters and your executives joining the groups in LinkedIn where the type of candidates they need to be interacting with are? And are they doing it in a meaningful way? What I do not suggest is that John, the technical recruiter, and Susan, the cybersecurity recruiter, join every single technical and cyber user group that's relevant and then just start spamming jobs. Precisely 0% of the people you want will be impressed with this. What I do recommend is that they join these groups, they add relevant and thoughtful information, they share stories about your company from time to time, they engage with the thought leaders in that group, they engage with the people posting, and they develop relationships. Now, surprising nobody, this is not a fast turnaround thing. This is an investment of time and energy, which only works when you're being proactive. Now, beyond this, While LinkedIn is hands down the number one business networking tool that's available, it's not the only one. There are still several user groups, often run by vendors for their particular product, that are places you can go. There's things like meetups.com where you can find other physical and virtual groups and sessions that you can become a part of. I go to conferences often as part of my own business. Now, I often see companies bringing their salespeople to conferences, which makes sense because there's an opportunity to potentially engage clients. I rarely see recruiters brought. And at many of the conferences that I go to, a significant portion of the attendees are cybersecurity people. Heck, a few weeks ago, both DEF CON and the Black Hat conferences were at Las Vegas. Why wouldn't you bring your recruiters to something like that? It's just a gold mine of potential candidates. So again, keep those things in mind. If you're already going to the conference, bring a recruitment representative. If your budget doesn't allow for that, then whoever you're sending, have them get some of your recruiters' cards, sit down with those recruiters, and be brought up to speed with the type of folks that they're in need of. Work together as a team. That's what proactive recruitment is all about. It's a team sport. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about here is being present in the spaces. I just alluded to it pretty heavily in talking about being where the places where your candidates are. There's no value in trying to cast lures into desert sands because you're not going to catch any fish. So being present where your candidates are is key, but also being present in a branded way. So when your recruiter does share a job in a group that they've added value to, thereby earning that right, then your recruiter should be presenting that job on your own letterhead in an attractive way, candidate focused, with what's in it for them first and what they need to have second. That is the key piece. When you're going out, make sure that recruiter's empowered with stories that they can share in these places, again, with attractive company logos and presented nicely. That's what we're talking about when we're being present. And the more that they're doing this, the more they're seeding that ground, the more that when the time comes, the candidates they need will respond to them. When you add all of these things up, when you embrace the two pillars approach of retention and recruiting, you become a destination employer. Now, not too many years ago, the gold standard for this were the FANG companies, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, and Apple, sorry. So the FANG companies. And they've lost a little bit of their luster. But when you mention any of those organizations, people know about them. Now, are you ever going to be as big a brand as they are? I don't know, because this is done virtually and I can't see who you are, so maybe you will. But you can dramatically improve your destination employer status. And your ability to do that is how you efficiently, cost-effectively, and consistently draw talent. Becoming a destination employer is a very doable goal for your organization if you embrace the 6 things that we talked about here. Now, I, as I mentioned, am the founder of Redbeard Solutions. If what we talked about here is a value to you and you want to keep the conversation moving, feel free to reach out to me. But regardless, the thing that I'd like you to stay focused on is just how empowered you truly are. Whether you're a 2-person company or a $20 billion company, your recruitment destiny is in your own hands by the way that you go to the employment marketplace and present yourself and the way that you consistently work in these areas. I thank you very much again for listening to me talk. I hope you got something from it, and I hope you have a great conference. Thanks again. Goodbye.